There you go. Okay, so, let me do this. There we go. Okay, so AMATYC webinars are sponsored by McGraw-Hill Higher Education. Please remember to, if you are not already a member of AMATYC, you are welcome to join. I've provided a QR code you can scan, as well as a bit.ly. Remember also that the views expressed by the presenters are not necessarily the views of AMATYC. Commercial products mentioned by presenters are not endorsed by AMATYC. AMATYC webinars are offered so that you can engage in professional development from the comfort of your home. So hopefully you got your Uggs on and maybe even your PJs. I will provide you with a link to complete the attendee survey towards the end of the presentation. It will populate into the chat feature. Remember, you can watch any webinar that has been recorded on our archive page. And of course, we have all kinds of other fun options for professional development through AMATYC, especially the Toronto conference. I'm looking forward to it. And so now I'm going to switch it over to Nan. And so Nancy, here you go.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. First of all, I'd like to tell you that this webinar is sponsored by the National Math Summit. We will have the 5th National Math Summit in person in Atlanta on March 16th and 17th, and I invite all of you to attend. The National Math Summit is a collaborative effort by many, many people. NAID, now NOS, will have their conference directly following the National Math Summit. They are a partner, as is, of course, AMATYC, the MAA, Carnegie Math Pathways, the Dana Center, a new partner, Achieving the Dream, and Paul Nolting. Next slide, please. So today's webinar is being held as a substitute for the in-person National Math Summit that was supposed to be held last March and then postponed to June in Las Vegas. And two of my very favorite people, Fred and Maria, were to give a presentation there. And since it was canceled, they are giving a webinar today. And I'd like to say just a little bit about them. You can read what's on the screen, but I've known them for many, many years. And first of all, I'd like to introduce you to Fred. I have known Fred for over 20 years. We got together when AMATYC had a task force on distance education, and we were on the distance learning committee together. When the distance learning committee was discontinued, AMATYC had a new committee, the Innovative Teaching and Learning Committee, and Fred became the chair of that committee. He's probably best known for being the MC in Ignite presentations. And if you attended the Ignite session this last year in Phoenix, you would have seen a great tribute to Fred as he's going out in glory for all the great work that he's done. And what's really very interesting is Maria and I were both there to cheer him on. And Maria was the one that brought the Ignite whole idea to AMATYC. Without her vision of doing that, and she was the very first webinar coordinator that AMATYC ever had. Without her vision, we would not be sitting here today. We would not be doing some of the things we are today. So you are all in for a treat. They are the most innovative people I know. Sit back and be engaged. And Fred, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, Maria, you're turning it over to Maria.
Oh, I'm turning it over to Maria. I guess I knew
Maria.
that.
Great, you got no problem sharing. Perfect, great, thank you.
Yeah. So let me get started here. This Zoom thing is in my way. 1 second. All right, so this is gonna be fast. Fred and I are both gonna present 5 strategies. I wanna talk about authentic assessment strategies. And I do not mean word problems when I say this. I mean assessment strategies that are most similar to what students will be doing in the workplace. So let's first just take a look at traditional STEM assessment, which typically looks like this. We give a lot of math tests as our form of assessment in mathematics. But in actual STEM workplaces, things look very different. People have access to references, computers, colleagues, all sorts of things that help them to do their job. So my first strategy here is to give students access to resources and technology when they do assessments in math. That is most similar to what their experience will be in the workplace. And this is a picture of my students taking tests in classes. They have access to a formula sheet that I provide for them. If I have a student online who doesn't have a printer, I just mail them one or suggest they print it at a friend's house or someplace else. But I think you should actually provide it for them instead of having them have to cram everything into a piece of paper, because I don't think that that actually does lead to any memory increase. And if you look at traditional exams like the engineering licensure exams, you should just know that they get 14 pages of mathematical formulas. That doesn't count probability and statistics. 14 pages given to them to take this exam. We need to allow them to have easy to use technology and make sure that your testing centers, if you use them, know how to administer exams with that technology. Just to kind of prove the point here, if we were looking at an example like solve a quadratic equation, here is an example equation. And anyone want to factor this one? Hands? Anyone? No? There's actually 4 ways we can solve a quadratic equation or more. We can solve it using factoring, completing the square, the quadratic formula, or technology. Just to look at this particular one I gave you, almost no equation in the real world can be solved with factoring, almost none, except the ones we make up for math textbooks. To actually do this problem using the quadratic formula or completing the square takes a lot of very careful algebra. To do it using technology just takes putting it in and knowing something about the technology to find the answers. Nobody in the real world is going to do anything other than find the answer with technology. I also think that to help with technology, it's great to use graphs from the real world, none of which look like graphs from textbooks. They're messy, they move around. And of course, every graph in the world broke in March of 2020 when everything became a piecewise graph. So I think you should also use graphs from the real world as part of this, using technology and resources. The second strategy is to assign demo videos for students. Talking about math is something they do need to do in the real world, whether they're in business, healthcare, or running their own enterprise, right? And so, by the way, this is my huskies howling in the background. We need to assign video demos to see if students can actually reason through the work instead of forcing them to do it in high stakes situations, especially for some of this stuff. So I wanted to just remind you that if you do something like this, you're going to want to make sure to use clear and very specific rubrics for how you're going to grade their demos. And I just thought I'd show you a little example demo. This is for a math for elementary teachers class.
Solve the equation 14 plus 30. That equation is in base 10. In order to solve it, we're going to come over here and use the exploding dots methods, where we will convert this problem into base 5.
I'll jump ahead a little bit in the video so you can see the explanation is what I'm going for here.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, dot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, dot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, dot.
So this is a form of assessment, right? Having the student actually explain their thinking as they do the problem. It's not something that has to be high stakes. It doesn't have to be done on the spot. Let me go to the next slide here. Here's another example of a video demo recorded by a student, shared with their permission. Same type of problem, it was the same type of class.
Let's start with 341. Since there's a 1 at the end, we're gonna have 1.
These are actually fairly easy to grade because I just make a recording of myself watching their recording. And so when he said, for example, 341 base 5, that should be 341 base 5, not 341 base 5, because that would be saying it in base 10. And I can make those kind of comments as I record myself watching their video, right? So it's very easy to grade and kick back to them. And you can get all the nuance of your voice in there and everything else. So video demos, a great authentic assessment. Another thing we can do to get that talking with math, that's so important, and reasoning out loud with math, is to use oral assessments, which became much more prevalent, I think, in the US when we hit the pandemic and needed some way to test, especially to know if the student is really the one doing the work. And so I thought I would show you just a couple snippets of, again, an assessment shared with the student's permission. So these are the questions that were asked. And I'm going to...
ready? Yeah. Describe the graph of a line. What is it that makes a line and not some other kind of curve?
The graph of a line is linear, either like vertical, horizontal, or depending upon the slope, it's linear. And it's probably the slope that makes it into the way it is. So it's at a constant rate rather than.
So you can see it sometimes takes them a second to get into the words they need to describe something, but it's so fascinating also to see how they back themselves into explanations, to see how well they actually know it. It's very easy to just use math, much harder to explain it. So you get a very deeper level of understanding and assessment this way. Now, you don't want to, you definitely want to give them, have a very rigorous way of testing this so that every student gets a very similar type of test. I actually write, as you can see in the example to the right, what I'm expecting to hear from students and how many points I'm going to give if I hear these things in their explanations. I do have an oral assessment primer, which I'll put in the chat window here for everybody. I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint. So you guys can go take a look at rubrics and different ways of writing oral assessments and examples there. There are also rubrics that can be used for solving a problem, like a story problem in an assessment. And this is an example of that, which is on that doc. In general, I would say there's three things you need to know about doing this. One, use software to help you schedule the sessions. I usually go with 15-minute sessions. Anything longer than that, you can't possibly make it work for your classes. I don't do every assessment as an oral assessment. I generally do 2 a semester as an oral assessment. And then you can require ID and a camera for their taking the assessment. They are the ones who schedule them. So they should be able to find a safe place, a camera, and a computer to do it on. And then I give students the specific list of LOs or course learning objectives that I will be examining on the exam so that they can kind of prepare ahead of time. The fourth strategy here is to give students agency in their assessment by asking them what they know instead of poking at what they don't know. This is much more similar to what happens in a workplace when you're sitting around a table and everybody is sharing their ideas about a problem and how to solve it. So for example, consider the difference between these 2 questions. A very traditional question for a test: what is the vertex of the given function? And then an alternate way to ask for similar types of information: give me 8 properties of the given function. This is what it looks like on a test if you ask for 8 properties of a given function. And you'll see one of the things they give you is the vertex, right? So if you were to just ask for the vertex, you would have only gotten 1 of these 8 pieces of information. And what if a student just couldn't remember the word for vertex, but they knew these 7 other things? In the traditional form of assessment, you would have given them a 0. In this form of assessment, you could give them like 7 out of 8 here, right? Again, here's one from a calculus exam. The difference between finding the limit algebraically, very kind of rote process, and you know most of them can't find the limit algebraically, they just do it the fast way, right? And then the other alternative is to give them some choice about how they find the limit. You can do it graphically, numerically, or algebraically, but you must use each method at least once for full credit, and then you give them several to find and let them choose the method that is most appropriate for the problem instead of you telling them how to do it, right? Again, you're giving them the agency to say, oh, I do know how to do this problem this way. Which of these am I going to do algebraically? Oh, that one. I like doing that one, right? You can see that in several cases, the students use more than one method to double check themselves because you're teaching them good practices, right? So give them agency in actually answering the questions. The fifth strategy here that I like to use for authentic assessment is having students elaborate as part of the assessment. It is part of the grade to elaborate. So what is an elaboration? It's showing a different way to solve a problem, showing how to check the answer, solving for something extra, like you ask for the vertex and they find the zeros, relating the concept in the problem to something else they've studied, relating it to a graph if there wasn't a graph, or if it was a graph, doing the algebra instead. This is my favorite one, actually, when they'll hypothesize on how changing the problem might change the answer. Like they'll say, if I change the B coefficient to be negative, I think it'll do this. And then they see what happens, right? And they learn a lot from doing that. They start to noodle around with the thinking outside of the very strict guidelines of the problems they're being asked to find. You can find a whole list in a rubric on my website on elaborations for critical thinking and STEM. Maybe Nancy or Fred can pull that one up for you guys. But I wanted to show you what this looks like in practicality on an assignment. The problem here is in the lighter shading. And so the problem was to solve a square root problem, right? So there's the solution. And a lot of students just say, oh, I'm going to check this. That's my elaboration. And that's a win, right? Students checking answers, huge win, especially when they do it on their own, right? And here's one where the student solved the problem and then checked for extraneous solutions and graphed it to show that they knew what that solution actually meant, that one side of the equation gives them this radical graph, and the other side of the equation is a horizontal line. And this point right here, 4,3, is where that x equals 4 solution is. Fantastic. They're connecting concepts. Here's a student. This is the entire problem that you're seeing here. And the white section up at the top is them solving the problem. And, they check it and realize they dropped a negative. They recheck it. They elaborate on it. They're wondering if they could just square individual pieces and it would work. And lo and behold, it doesn't work, right? So they're learning on their own about the problem. And I always say for elaborations that really good elaborations get an extra credit point. My choice. Right? And that encourages, especially your students who might be a little at the higher end for the class, or just really want to get that extra credit because they know they might be at the low end, to really try hard to do unique things in their elaborations. They might do more than one elaboration to get it. They might do something really insightful to get it. But I always leave that open as a possibility because I believe that extra credit is from extra effort throughout the course, not just a Herculean effort at the end, right? So in summary, those are 5 strategies I have for authentic assessment: giving students resources and technology, assigning video demos to see if they can explain what they're doing, talking using oral assessments, giving them agency about what they know instead of poking just at what they don't know, and then using elaborations to encourage students to innovate. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Fred. Fred's going to go, and then we will take any questions that have not been answered already in the chat from you at the end. So take it away, Fred.
All right. Thanks, Maria. I'm going to share my screen, but I'm going to do just a portion of it. I have a giant, like 40-inch screen. So let me narrow it down here. There, I think that'll work. How's that look? Can you see my opening slide there, everybody? Yeah, okay, Nancy, you're nodding yes, thanks. So I wanted to pay a special thanks to all of our sponsors, of which there are many. I'm gonna go through a lot of slides, and if you want to, it is posted in the cloud right now at this website. So if you want to go access it, open it up in a different viewing window and linger on some of the slides longer than I have time to spend on them, you may do that. I'm going to open up with the fact that blank squares in an online synchronous Zoom class meeting, black squares are so ubiquitous that they've even been taken over by the Wordle phenomenon. So it is true that if you see a bunch of black squares in your online course synchronous meetings, it's a big challenge. You have no idea what's going on in the lives of your students outside of or during your class meeting. These are just some of the things that might be happening to your students. Just having black squares is one fear, but I closed my eyes and thought deeply over all the years I've been teaching online and all the things I've heard from students and professors about negative aspects of teaching and learning online. In fact, at one dinner Maria and I had together many, many years ago, Maria confessed to me, "Fred, what are we doing to these students?" I don't know if you remember that night, Maria, but that was probably 10 or 15 years ago when teaching online hadn't quite reached the zenith that we have achieved today. So I actually plan to go through all these things over the next 20 minutes, except for the very last one. Maria talked about assessment, but I'm going to try and cover everything else. I also have 5 strategies, the first of which is a no-brainer. You want to maximize student-to-student interaction, much more so than student-to-instructor interaction. Because what you and I do as professors really is not important. It's what the students do that matters. In fact, the holy grail of teaching online is getting students to interact with each other instead of responding individually to the instructor. I can tell you that that type of collaboration will raise the collective level of knowledge, and it will lower student isolation, which is so prevalent in online classes. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, but fortunately, people have become much more comfortable with remote interaction now. And you can expect your students to have a great deal of comfort doing that. So what you want to think about are all the interactive and collaborative activities that you used to do in the classroom and think of ways to incorporate them online. Here's just a list of a few. I'm sure that everyone attending this webinar at one point or another has done all of these activities in the classroom. So what you want to do now is come up with some ideas to incorporate these online. So where do you get ideas from? Going back again to a friend of mine named Maria Andersen, who told me 16 years ago, "Fred, get your butt on social media." In the year 2006, that meant Twitter and Facebook. Now, of course, it's going to include Instagram and even TikTok. And I have to tell you that if you can curate your feed on social media, like I've done, for example, on Twitter, these are just maybe my top 50 influencers, so that every time I open up Twitter, I get a golden nugget. If you want to pick 2 to start with, I recommend Howie, a professor at Fresno State, and Michelle Pacansky-Brock, who works for the California Community Colleges as a faculty mentor and faculty developer. Every time one of these influencers posts, I typically get a golden nugget of an idea, like this one. Here's someone who made an effort to create a template for a test review, where students are randomly assigned a test review problem and then asked to share out, either in a whole class discussion or in a real classroom or in a virtual class discussion, their thinking on that review question. And here's another one. A professor encouraging students to take a look at wrong answers and find out what happened when someone gives a wrong answer to a question. You know, you want to teach them that you can learn from your mistakes. The Twitter hashtag is wrong and brilliant. This is a great one. I mean, my first impulse in answering this question was not correct. What signed number, what integer would you input to move the blue buzzer so that when you press it, it hits the purple ball on top? How would you represent that using an equation? Well, there's a right answer and there's a popular wrong answer. So have a little discussion about that. Here's a little golden nugget I found about a professor, a writing and English professor, who is trying to guide her students to make more elaborate responses in a class discussion. And I thought this would work great in a math class. You know, otherwise you're going to get students who contribute discussion posts saying like, what's 2 plus 3? And saying, oh, I like how Jane said 2 plus 3 equals 5. That's not really a valid discussion prompt, something that you wouldn't want to give credit to anyone for, would you? Okay, my second strategy, and I kind of cheated here. I combined 3 strategies into one. Intervene early. And I'm talking about within the first few days of the beginning of the semester. This particular study showed that students who procrastinate half the time or more are not likely to pass your class. And you can tell this to students. I'm intervening early because my experience tells me that students who fall this far behind at this point in the class end up not passing. So after the first few days of a class, I'll send out this email to students who have not submitted any work yet, warning them that they're in danger of being dropped from the class. And far from students being upset about receiving a message like this, they typically respond with thanks. And then a few days later, when a student still hasn't submitted work, and our college has really strongly wants professors to drop students who are inactive or no-shows, I'll send them this. You've been dropped, and here's the reason why. But notice the second paragraph. Hey, it's not too late. If you want to catch up, you can. I built a lot of flexibility into the class. You won't lose any points. And then I give them agency. Or just remain dropped from the class and try again another semester. Let me know what you decide. The decision is yours. I'll help any way I can. And again, the response has been very positive to this. I can tell you that I typically get 3 responses when students drop a class. They say they want to catch up, and I tell them, great, do that, and I'll immediately reinstate you. About a third of the students do catch up and get reinstated. A third of them say they'll catch up and don't do anything. And a third never respond and end up staying dropped from the class. But I can tell you that early interventions such as this do pay off. Our college, before the pandemic, recognized professors for whom succession retention rates were higher for their online classes than they were for their in-person classes. And I was one of those professors. So something I'm doing must be working. The 80-20 rule refers to the fact that most of your students are doing fine in the class, but 20% of them who are falling behind or have a overall average in the class that's not passing. Spend 80% of your time reaching out on a frequently proactive basis to those students. And then the third component of this second strategy is to include the affective domain, which is part of Bloom's taxonomy. It's the feelings, emotions, attitude, and behavior. You definitely want to pay special attention to that. Research shows that it makes a difference in final course grades. Even small interventions, like how are you feeling? You know, what's going on? What is your support strategy for this class? I might ask students when we meet in Zoom. In fact, I have a list of over 40 discussion prompts, one of which I always select every time our class meets in a synchronous activity. And I have a link for you to take a look at that. Strategy number 3. I have to credit Maria for this again, who told us in one of her presentations that a homework question is not a discussion. And typically, professors whose course websites I observe typically have for their discussion prompts something like, here's a homework question, please solve it and show your work, and then respond to another student's work on this problem. That's not a discussion. Instead, I want something that's more open-ended. If it has a low floor, meaning it's really easy to just, for instance, in this case on the left-hand side, just plug in numbers into the boxes and see what happens. But to come up with an answer to the question can often take some deep thinking of high-level mathematical concepts. You want questions that are Googleable, that engage Bloom's higher order thinking skills. Questions with no one right answer. Now that's a discussion. Questions that are fun. I often give this one as an extra credit problem. And what's fun is to have students make a drawing and include that as part of their response. And I'll talk about how I get students to show their work in cases like this in just a minute. Where do I get these types of problems? I probably have on my computer and flash drive 200 of these. And rather than share them all with you, I'll show here where I get them from. So check these sources out. Books, websites, journals. I'm an avid reader and explorer of all these resources. My fourth strategy, teach students how to communicate mathematically online. It's not easy. If you don't guide students toward mathematical communication and proper communication online, you'll end up with stuff like this where they use their mouse on a digital whiteboard. We as professors have great resources, both hardware and software. But the students, not so much. They don't have the deep pockets we do. They don't have the desire or the time if they're taking a full load of coursework or working full-time or have families. So you got to work with what they have. You know what, by the way, Nan, I forgot to set my timer, so maybe you could give me a 2-minute warning. Could you do that, Nan? Thanks. Sure. I point students to free or low-cost mobile scanning apps where they do their work as usual on paper and pencil and take pictures and send me a multi-page PDF file. I don't know of anybody else doing this, but it was my idea, brilliant, low-cost solution to a high-tech problem. A normal pen or pencil won't work, but if you get a thick Sharpie and write on a piece of paper and hold it up to your webcam, that's a way to instantaneously allow students to show their work to you and to each other. Or some of you may have done this in the classroom, individual whiteboards. You can hold those up to your webcam. The nice thing about that is it's erasable. Have them use some type of screen capture software that embeds the HTML code into the clipboard, and then you can paste it online. Okay, fifth strategy, and this is probably the most important. I think this is what gives me a very high success and retention rate in my online courses. I've been able to replicate the classroom online by having synchronous Zoom class meetings. And typically the first one of these I have for the semester, if someone hasn't ever done this in an online class before, I get comments like, "Woo, this is just like being in class." I love when I hear that. Yes, students might push back in the beginning, but I can tell you that I've had students give super positive comments on synchronous meetings in an online class, saying that it was even something they looked forward to as they're being kept off campus because of the pandemic. So let me spend a minute on this slide here to include success, equity, and inclusion in synchronous activities. Right from day one, you want to post the schedule of meetings and you want to explain why are you requiring to have microphones and webcams turned on. Of course, you want to be flexible if someone has a bad hair day, which has happened to me. You can opt them out of turning their webcam on. But I ask everyone, if I'm in a Zoom meeting and someone doesn't have their webcam turned on or it's pointed to the ceiling, I ask them to correct that. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Someone's always asking, what's the best time to schedule your meeting? And so because it's impossible to please everyone, I suggest you pick what time and days are best for you. Every week is a bit overkill. Every 2 or 3 weeks works great for me, and I pick a weekday evening just for an hour. Record the meetings so students who miss it can watch the recording. And here's a big thing, show up 15 minutes early to greet students. I sometimes find those 15 minutes are the best part of the webinar. when the time comes to start the meeting, I hit the record button, and I actually spend a little time summarizing what we talked about during those 15 minutes. Because your time is limited, you won't have time to cover or teach everything. That's not the purpose of these meetings. These meetings are more to highlight and summarize and motivate. You can tell them that content is everywhere. Here's just a few of my favorite professor vetted websites that I know if something is, if I know of something students are typically struggling on for the course, I might refer them to a lesson in one of these websites. I use item analysis before I start the meeting to find out what homework and quiz questions my students are struggling on, and those are the ones I'll go over. I'll preload that content up front. Because your time is limited, someone may want to stay afterwards and meet with you one-on-one. Someone may ask for something you don't have time for, and I'd like to guide those extra content to, what happened? Whoa. What is going on? I lost my whole presentation.
You broke the internet, Fred.
Yeah. All right. I'm not sure what the hell happened. Oh, somehow I added 50 slides. I think my elbow pressed a button. I'll just skip down these blank ones.
Okay,
preload the content. Guide students to the discussion board if you run out of time. A significant percentage of their grade in the class should come from these discussions. And using the 80-20 rule, I actually follow up with every student who missed a meeting, and it's one-on-one. Okay. Next, some more tips for breakout rooms. Similar to the Japanese pedagogy of think, pair, share, before you involve students with sharing and breaking out into breakout groups, have the students think for a minute and jot some ideas down. Otherwise, they may have nothing to contribute to the group. Thanks, Nan. 3 minutes. You may have students type something into the chat, but don't hit enter until you tell them to. And then if you do break them up into small groups, you want to ask students to show you what they're working on. Here's a 60-second great TikTok video of a group of students who totally fake out their teacher in the breakout rooms. You may want to watch that. I highly recommend it. If you Google, are breakout rooms good or bad, the most common complaint is, what are we supposed to be doing? Make sure your instructions for the breakout room is clear. And during the breakout rooms, if you have a whole class discussion afterwards, try not to have any small number of students dominate the discussion. Instead, find some way to call on students at random. Speaking of webcams, I wish you could watch this 3-minute TikTok video of a kindergarten teacher who uses facial and expressions and hand gestures so effectively. It turns out that there is a disability called body dysmorphia disorder for students who can't see their self view in Zoom, but you can hide that. So tell your students that you require microphones and webcams to be turned on, but you can hide your self view and show them how to do that. I try to make them feel comfortable in my course website by saying that you're welcome to have friends, family, babies, pets. I've seen it all: cats, dogs, pigs, and babies. I've all attended class meetings with my students in Zoom. They can see ahead of time what times and dates every meeting will be, and a summary of what will take place during the meeting. And I may have even finished early if I still have a minute left. Those are my 5 strategies that have worked for me, and I encourage you to try these out if some of them might seem new to you. I myself use that technique called the CASE method: copy and steal everything. So if you have any questions on any of these activities or strategies, the last portion of our webinar will be Q&A. Did I finish on time, Nan?
You did a great job, Fred.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. And you know, I have learned some interesting things too. And somebody asked for you to put the link in the chat of the video about what the students do in the breakout rooms. And I thought that's one I want to check out and see myself, because you never know what they're really doing.
It's true. And they were very good at faking it out. They even strategize, hey, when the professor drops in, who's going to talk? And they agree on who will say something and what that person will say. And it's typical, like the professor typically says, how are you doing? Oh, we're doing great. It's like when you walk around students in your class and you ask them, do you have any questions? Is everything okay? Oh, no questions. Everything's fine. But if instead you say, show me what you're working on. That's what you want to do. Show me what you're working on.
And questions can certainly make all the difference in engaging your students. And just like asking the non-traditional questions, asking the open-ended questions.
Yeah, and just to make another point about that, the most common complaint is, what are we supposed to be doing? I've experienced that myself in so many Zoom webinars. They break us up into groups and someone says typically, do you know what we're supposed to be doing? It happens so often.
It absolutely does. So one of the questions that was posted earlier, Maria, was talking about video assignments and what is the best way to assign the video assignments in a learning management system?
It depends on the learning management system. I usually give the students two options. One, that they can give me a URL to the video, and two, that they can upload the video. Sometimes videos are really big and they don't upload well into learning management systems. So I usually have them, they almost like 99% of the time just use their phones to make the videos. And if those videos are too big, I have them download the Handbrake app, which will let them compress the videos to smaller sizes. And I've had many students thank me for teaching them to use Handbrake, because it also means they can do that with all of their other videos, which frees up room on their phone. So that works well. And they can use the LMS apps right from their phone to take their video right into the grading portion of the LMS usually.
I know one of the things that my students have difficulty with is having too large of files. And one of the things my grandson actually taught me was how to use Snippet right after the pandemic started. And he was so confused in his math with not going to the classroom. And so he was saying he was going to use Snippet. I said, what is Snippet? And bam, I'm like, why did I not know this? This is like the best thing in the world. I use it all the time. And it's really helpful for all kinds of reasons. Let's see what other questions we might have here.
I just posted the link to that 60-second TikTok video about students faking out their professor in a breakout room.
One of the things I thought I might show this group is I put the links in the chat, but if I can just grab the screen for a second. One of the things I found most effective about the breakout rooms is, one, what Fred said, think, pair, share. They have to think about a problem and try it themselves before they ever go to a room to talk about it. There's a lot of strategies I use around that. I use whiteboard and just plain old fashioned whiteboards with showing them on the screen or asking for specific questions for those who aren't using their camera. But one of the things I find that works the best and the students love the most is grading other people's work. And so one of the things that I love to do in those breakout rooms is to, I actually use submitted work from previous semesters, and I just screenshot, these are not the students' real names, but just screenshot answers to problems from previous semesters. And I give each student a name so they can talk easily about the problem. And, so this is Beth's solution to the problem, and Sam's solution to the problem, and Max's solution to the problem, and Chris's solution to the problem. And they get the problem and how many points the problem is worth. And they have to determine what they would actually grade the student. And they love arguing about that. So that tends to get the conversation going really well. Plus, they have the link to the document, which means that they all know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be grading this out of 3 points. And then the other trick I have is to always make sure to choose somebody in every group that is going to be the one who reports back to the class about their results, because that tends to motivate one person in the group to really make sure that the group stays on track, because they know they're the ones reporting back. So those are some things that can help, but I do find that if you can give them a document, a question, something that they have access to in that group, because, you know, once they leave the main Zoom, they don't have this slide anymore, right? So whatever you were showing them, they can't see it. And I think that has changed maybe in the last year, but in the old days, they couldn't see it. And that might be something you have to turn on in your Zoom room too. So, or if you use a different kind of room, you might not have it at all. But these work really great. I put a couple examples in the chat so you can kind of see them. And I find that it generates a ton of conversation as they argue about whether to take off points for spelling or, you know, not showing a particular item that they were asked to show.
Maria, how many people do you typically have in a breakout room when you're doing something like that?
3 to 4.
I have found
2
that
is dangerous, because if one of them doesn't talk, it's not enough. Any more than 4 and a few people will check out for sure, right? Which is just the way it is in the classroom, right? Like,
right, absolutely. So you have found, and Fred, how about you when you do breakout rooms?
Yeah, same thing, 3 to 4. I think that's the sweet spot.
And how do you randomly select the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I let Zoom randomly assign them.
That makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Is there any time when you specifically put people in groups?
I try to do it during a 1 hour Zoom synchronous meeting twice. Maybe the first 10 minutes and then maybe the last 20 minutes, you know, like 10 minutes and 40 minutes into the meeting. And I find they're very effective. If I attended a webinar just yesterday where the speaker put us in breakout rooms, and it was the highlight of the webinar. There were probably about as many attending that webinar as this one in the 50s and 60s. And she gave us five, it was an hour and a half long webinar. And we had 5 minutes in the first breakout room and 8 minutes in the second. And in both sessions, they went by way too fast.
Yeah, and that's another question that I have. What kind of time frame do you have? Because if you give them too much time, it just kind of like, so what do you typically do? Like Maria, when you're having them discuss those problems and grading them, how long do you give them to do that?
It depends on how difficult the problem is to do. So usually I actually have them do the problem first before they go to the breakout room. So everybody has given the problem a try on their own. So then they can go to the breakout rooms and argue about what the correct answer is, because I don't tell them to grade the problem, right? So, so there's that portion that's up front where they try the problem. And then I think in the rooms, I usually give them about 2 minutes of a problem. So if there's 4 student works, there might be about 8 minutes. It's funny. They usually grade harder than I do. So we usually make a little grid when they come back of everybody's, you know, what they would give Sam. And then I have at the bottom what I would, like, I have it already written down what I would have graded them as. So they
so
usually
you have everybody report out.
I do. We do it really quickly. So usually the first couple groups to report, we'll give some details, and then I'll say, you know, okay, now the rest of the groups, just tell me your numbers, because I just pick at random. So that way it doesn't take too long, but they can hear what each other have said, because they're always curious, you know, like what did you give Sam and why? You know, like why did they take off points? What did Sam do that I didn't see, right? Like, but also it just helps them to focus much more on their own carefulness, on their own assessments, right? To see how easy it is to miss points if you just don't pay attention to the directions.
Like Maria, I also think a whole class share out is important after breakout groups. I might ask for 2 or 3 reports. One, I might ask for the first one, maybe I'll ask for a volunteer. There's typically someone who's not shy and willing to break the ice.
Yeah.
And then the second time I call on a student at random. I showed you my Wheel of Names website, but I warn them, of course, that before they go into breakout rooms, that I may call on a student at random to share their group's results. So be prepared to be called on.
So you're holding them accountable.
Yeah,
Yeah. I like to choose up front who's going to be responsible, because I think it tends to put somebody immediately in charge once they go into the group. And I think that usually helps, because somebody will be like, no, we got to get to the next problem. Right.
And do you visit the groups?
Pardon?
Do you pop in to visit the groups?
I don't usually say anything. I just pop in, make sure they're talking, and then pop to the next one.
Yeah, that's a good strategy. I may not visit all the groups, but I may visit a couple. But I also sometimes, if it's a 10-minute breakout group, professors need a break too. You can't talk for an hour straight. You wouldn't want. I mean, I tell the students I'm leaving my office. You guys can all talk to and see and hear each other. I'll be right back. And then I go in and have a sip of wine, say hi to my wife, watch a few minutes of whatever TV show she's on.
That's very different than what you can do in the classroom. But a lot of the strategies that you have talked about, I want everybody attending the webinar to realize that many of those things that you have talked about can also be used in the traditional classroom. And
yeah, I did that where I leave the room. I did that many, many years ago, and I really got afraid that someone was going to tell the dean on me. But I'll break the classroom up into groups. I say, you guys, I've got to make some copies. I made up some excuse. I'll be back in a few minutes. And then I just leave the room. When another professor walked by and I put my arm around him and pointed to my room and said, look, the sign of a truly great professor, when you can leave the room and there's still high-level learning taking place.
So actually, all of the strategies I shared were strategies I was using in face-to-face classrooms and online classrooms pre-pandemic. Well, with the exception of one, oral exams I started doing after the pandemic started, I think
Yeah.
so.
I shared with
the
Maria,
rest of them were stuff we were already doing in classes, and they were both types of classes. So
I shared with Maria at the Phoenix AMATYC on the last day, the past president of the MAA gave a presentation to a small group on alternatives to traditional assessment, and oral exams were the highlight of her presentation. And I saw someone ask, how many problems and do you pick them? And what she did was she gave the students 6 questions, and she allowed them to pick which question they want to answer first. And then she picked the next 2. And she also said that this is not a good idea to just do once or twice during the semester, that you need to have 4 or 5 of these so they become familiar and comfortable with the format.
Oh, so I actually did practice exams with the students ahead of time as a group.
Good.
So that's how we got comfortable with the format, but I didn't have time, especially as an adjunct, to spend 15 minutes with 30 students.
She also warned us in the audience that this is not a way to assess totally, because if you just give students a list of 6 questions, that doesn't cover the entire course. So you need to have other assessments that cover more material. But
I think it's a particularly good strategy for, how we always have that question, how do you know the student's the one actually doing the work? So I actually have a caveat in my syllabus that if I determine from your oral assessment that you don't know the subject very well, but if that is vastly different from your open book tests and things like that, that I will start, I have the right.
It's suspicious.
I have the right to start proctoring your tests, or, whatever. And that's actually enough, I think, to get most students to, either start do the honest work on their take-home assessments, or, just be like, oh, she's going to check, and they just drop. And I'm actually fine with that too. If they're going to cheat, they could just cheat in somebody else's class.
So we're almost running out of time, but I'd like each of you to give one last piece of advice to the people attending the webinar today. So one last thought, Fred?
I guess it would be to the proactive 80-20 rule. Every week I look at my grade book and I find and single out the students who are struggling, who are behind. who are not passing the class, and I reach out to them. And I do a nice mix of group emails. For instance, the one I showed you in my presentation. If you receive this email, it means you have not submitted anywhere. If you received this email, let's see, quiz 2 was due Sunday night, last night. If you received this email, it means you have not submitted or not passed either quiz 1 or quiz 2. Experience tells me that students who fall this far behind at this point don't end up passing the class. I'm trying to prevent that. So that's an example of a group email to the 20% of the students who are behind in their quizzes. And even though it's a mass group email, it typically triggers a reply that I have to give an individual response to. And it's very time consuming to do that every week. I mentioned that I send an email that I contact individually students who haven't attended the synchronous class meetings, which is typically a good 20% of the class. They don't show up to the meeting live and they don't watch the recording and post a summary. I reach out individually to those students. Hey, I noticed you've missed the first 2 meetings. And I explain the consequences of not attending and missing the material we discussed, but they also lose participation points, which will affect their grade.
Okay,
it's not too late.
We've got 1 minute left, Fred. We need to get Maria to have a little statement too.
Okay, so a lot of individual proactively reaching out to students who are struggling.
I think in line with what Fred said, I want to read you something I read in an Amanda Gorman poem earlier today that I thought was really poignant for the time we're in. Distance can distort our deepest sense of who we are, leave us warped and wasted as winter's end. And I think that a lot of our students are struggling with mental health issues right now, with loneliness. A lot of our professors are too. And not just following up to see, why a student has fallen behind, but I find the magic words for getting a student to open up are, is everything okay? So at the end of some of those emails, in some of my texts to them, I will just say, is everything okay? And, sometimes I end up getting on the phone with a student who really needs to talk to somebody and needs to be sent to the right resources to help them with some problem. And nobody has asked them, is everything okay? And I think, that's important too.
It's the compassion. It's being compassionate, being caring. And you two are both very caring people. And I know that your students are very fortunate to have you. So thank you so much for presenting on the behalf of the National Math Summit. I hope to see some of you in Atlanta, actually see people in person, which would be wonderful. So if you're interested, go to the NOS website and sign up to attend. And Mary, do you have any last points?
Not really, thank you. I appreciate both y'all and you, Nancy, showing up and doing this great webinar. This recording, of course, will be posted as soon as possible on the AMATYC webinar archive page, okay?
Thank you, Nan. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Y'all have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.